Beside your own case, what do you consider the most egregious prosecutions for white hat hacking?
Aaron Swartz, I think, is the most egregious because of the outcome, and because Carmen Ortiz's office and the Boston U.S. Attorney's Office knew he was an especially vulnerable person with a history of clinical depression, and it appears the Assistant U.S. Attorney Heyman and his team basically pushed him knowingly to commit suicide. Other than Swartz's case, and I know he's a very controversial figure who's had some, disparaging things to say about me personally, but, even though just on an objective basis and as a technologist looking at the law of the matter, I think the prosecution of Weave in the Third Circuit in New Jersey was especially egregious because it's not clear that he ever really broke the law, and if the law is so vague that even if the alleged conduct were true, most technologists I think recoil in horror of that being against the law, just changing a parameter in a URL, and now all of a sudden you're facing a felony indictment. And I appreciate that the Third Circuit vacated his conviction and basically punted the matter out of their jurisdiction. And I think they were right in doing so for the reason that they did, but I regret that they never reached the kind of more substantive matter of could this conduct ever be illegal in the first place. I don't think that it was, or that it could reasonably be ruled that way. I think the law is so vague here as to be unconstitutional and to violate due process. I'm trying to think if there are other cases. Jeremy Hammond's case was also just terribly egregious. The fact that the judge didn't recuse, when a recusal was clearly merited, and that, he got the maximum sentence even though he took a plea, is awful. I think even looking at the PayPal 14 case and the fact that, most of them avoided jail time, if not all of them avoided jail time, and that, they're able to do a replea and they're not stuck with a felony for life. I think even there, the fact that there even was a prosecution for that, I think is just awful. I think the prosecutors pursuing these cases are terrible human beings. I hope they get fired. They should be spending their time worrying about real crimes where, you have people whose lives are shattered instead of going after, people who you may agree, you may disagree with what their political motives were, but they had political motives in doing what they did. I don't agree with every single one of these individuals. But, I don't agree with every protester. I don't agree with every sign I see at every protest. I don't have to. It's a First Amendment issue, and it's a civil disobedience issue. By just bringing the dialogue forward in a lot of cases, these people have moved the political bar forward. Sometimes even not in the direction that they might have liked, but they still bring the conversation forward. If you have any specific questions about specific other cases that I'm familiar with, I'm happy to answer them. Okay, next question.
Is there any circumstance in which you believe it is just for a hacker to be criminally prosecuted?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and differentiate here in a big way from cases like those where I kind of mentioned before, where the person did not have a profit motive, was not going to benefit from their action in any undue way, versus something where there is kind of a profit motive, where there is a fraud, where there is a potential personal benefit. I'm not going to say in broad strokes this type of case should always be prosecuted, because I think there are always exceptions. There may be instances where a person had a profit motive and still should not be prosecuted for something. The law is so vague and so poorly written in the United States, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, that you're going to find all kinds of instances that are, that raise key questions. But I think that, coming after people for 10 years per count, 5 years per conspiracy count, for acts that are benevolent, where someone is trying to do the right thing. You know, where other civil disobedience is not subject to such harsh felony, convictions with such high fines and restitution, and we as a society have to choose, right, what types of behavior we want to incentivize and disincentivize. And the behaviors we want to disincentivize should not be selfless behaviors that were meant to further the greater good, protect children from abuse, protect whistleblowers, etc. And we right now are allowing prosecutors like Carmen Ortiz, like David Diadio, like Seth Costo, to use the law as a cudgel to bully people against protecting children like Justina Pelletier, when it is the allies of people like Costo and Diadio who tortured children like Justina and paralyzed them. And they are allowed to use this law as a cudgel, not to pursue justice for these kids, but to basically exact political revenge against the people who stood up for these kids. And that's egregious. These people should not be allowed to hold positions of trust and authority in the United States. Next question, please.
What did you think about the Ashley Madison hack, which got a lot of publicity, but in the end seems to have achieved nothing but publicity for the company?
I mean, I'm not going to condone, the behavior of the Ashley Madison company or any of the people who are on that site. I believe in marital fidelity myself. I have a lovely wife who's been with me through thick and thin and taken this whole ride. So I don't want anything that I'm going to say to be misconstrued as some kind of a tacit approval of anything that company does or that the people on its site were doing, because I don't approve of that site or what the people on it are doing. That being said, again, what do we want as a society to spend our resources trying to disincentivize when we have murder, when we have rape, when we have, these very serious kinds of transgressions, where we have an opioid epidemic that's killing tens or hundreds of thousands of people? What as a society do we want to focus on and prioritize? I don't think that, Ashley Madison is that big a deal that it merits this kind of level of scrutiny. When, we have children being tortured in the troubled teen industry, and there's very little coverage of that. So I wish that the torture of these institutionalized children, the horrible deaths that these children have been forced to endure, that got the level of attention that, something like the Ashley Madison hack got, because then you might actually have fewer children tortured to death. And that being said, too, I do believe in personal privacy. And while I might not approve of what these people were doing, it doesn't mean that their privacy should be invaded. I don't approve of what President Clinton did with Monica Lewinsky. But it doesn't necessarily mean that should rise to the level of impeachment. And I don't know what the facts of the Stormy Daniels situation are with President Trump, but it largely doesn't matter, because even if true, it doesn't rise to the level of what's been kind of stirred up over it. And I feel similarly about Ashley Madison.
Okay. What advice do you have for people who engage in ethical hacking, either as a profession or a hobby?
I mean, it depends on how you define ethical hacking. You're going to find a lot of different definitions of that. If you mean the kind of professional, paid, like security audit, pen testing kind of world where you're not really ever going to be subject to any kind of criminal or civil prosecution, then, it'd be mostly technical advice in terms of like staying up to date, keeping your skills sharp, not trying to avoid absolutes in terms of like, well, you'll never be hacked. You can never say that, any system is totally secure, right? If you're talking more about the types of things that Aaron Swartz was charged with, that Weave was charged with, that the PayPal 14 were charged with, I don't think I have any particular advice that I would like to offer on that. It's more of just, if you are willing to risk your freedom and your well-being to try to do what is right, knowing that a terrible human being like Carmen Ortiz, Steve Heyman, David DiAdio might come after you and put you in jail for years and seek hundreds of thousands of dollars from you on top of that, all to protect people who torture and paralyze and kill children. I salute you for your bravery, and I wish that the world wasn't this way, and I hope that Congress takes some kind of meaningful action to see to it that what happened to Aaron Swartz, what happened to Weave, what's been happening to me, what's happened to these other people doesn't continue to happen. And that's, on kind of a broader scope, these prosecutors who would misappropriate their authority to do the kinds of things that Carmen Ortiz did, and that Steve Heyman did, and that David DiAdio and Seth Costo are doing, right? I hope that it's not just CFAA cases. It's these laws empower bad prosecutors to be terrible people. And these laws should be curbed because you do have prosecutors who are terrible people. On top of that, though, these prosecutors, whether it's a CFAA case or not, federal prosecutors are largely unaccountable. They can do whatever they want, and no one's going to be able to touch them. Under Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, the president is supposed to have authority to fire a misbehaving federal prosecutor. They don't want to be answerable to the president. They claim that they require independence from both the president and from the legislature to pursue these cases. But what they really have is a situation where the constitutional checks and balances, the safeguards on them misappropriating their power, they've kind of maneuvered themselves out of that so that they are wholly unaccountable to anybody while they are pursuing one of these travesties. And even after a situation like Aaron Swartz, right, who lost their job over that? Who got fined over that? Nobody. Absolutely nobody. So, prosecutors are supposed to hold people accountable. That's what their job is to hold people accountable under the law. They've misappropriated that position to make themselves completely unaccountable to anybody. And so I guess my advice for people looking to engage in ethical hacking would be know your opponent and know that they are terrible, awful human beings.
And finally, how are you doing physically and emotionally?
Physically, I'm doing terribly. My blood pressure is between 180 and 210 over about 130 or 140 any given time. I haven't been offered to see a dentist in over a year. I haven't actually seen a dentist, my entire time down because the one time I was offered was during my hunger strike when I was refusing all medical care. I'm probably, within months of having a stroke or a heart attack. I don't think the government cares. I think they want another dead activist at this point. I think Judge Gorton, who is my judge, who is the same judge Aaron had, from his actions, he seems to want another dead activist. He hasn't recused, despite the fact that Boston Children's Hospital donated $50,000 to a charity of which he was on the board of advisors as late as 2012, according to his latest financial disclosure. So no, I'm not doing very well. Stress is, a huge concern, with all of this. I'm very busy writing and trying to do everything I can, trying to hold these really terrible people accountable, because they're, in my eyes, they're accessories after the fact to a crime against humanity. What happened to Justina and what's happened to other kids, including like Aaron Bacon, who Deseret News covered, his story. we have a filing today that should be meritorious. Reading the letter of the law, it should be the end of the case. I've kind of given up on the idea of having any kind of justice in Boston federal court. You have a judge like Marianne Bowler who should have recused the minute she saw the search warrant affidavit and didn't. And apparently that's just fine. Apparently, you can have a biased judge sign off on a bogus warrant and still be detained, after that. And it's not even grounds for these people to examine dropping the case, apparently. And that gets back to the previous point about, the people who are going to engage in this kind of, civically minded activism. Know your opponent and be prepared to die.
Okay, that's it.
Okay. Thank you for the write-up. Let us know if you have any other follow-up questions.